Good morning. You can load us in your buses behind your prison door. When you think you've silenced us, there will be 3,000 more. We are gathered here today to put our bodies in harm's way at the school of death and shame. No more murder in our name. From Panama to Georgia, will be ever in your sight. With so much blood upon your hands, how do you butchers sleep at night? We are gathered here today to put our bodies in harm's way at the school of death and shame. No more murder in our name. Dare to call them freedom fighters, call the butchers what you will, but from Hara to Allende, it is freedom that you kill. We are gathered here today to put our bodies in harm's way at the school of death and shame. No more murder in our name. People want land and justice, and they answer freedom's call. If you try to feed your people bullets, someday soon you all will fall. We are gathered here today to put our bodies in harm's way at the school of death and shame. No more murder in our name. All across the country, the news spreads from town to town. Every day a new voice shouting, shut this school of torture down. We are gathered here today to put our bodies in harm's way at this school of death and shame. No more murder in our name. We are gathered here today to put our bodies in harm's way at the school of death and shame. No more murder in our name. Now that song, I don't actually do it anymore because it sounds too optimistic for the current historical period, but this is a broadcast about history, so I relearned it for the morning. And hey, from Buenos Aires. Hello, Buenos Aires. What a wonderful city. I spent 2 weeks there, and I'd love to go back. But this is module 6 of my weekly Monday morning missive on musical history. Little excerpts from my musical history teaching aid, which is at davidrovics.com/history for all interested in the rest of it. And those of you who are watching, if you would like to share the broadcast on Facebook or Twitter or wherever else to let other people know it's happening, that would be much appreciated by me and hopefully others. This is the 6th episode, and maybe the first episode when I'm not sick. I can't remember when I got sick, but it seems like I've been sick for half of these episodes, but I'm better now. In case anybody was worried. The flu is going around this country, as is other things. The cold, and I don't know what else. But But that song is this module covers events from largely the 80s, early 90s. Bristol, UK, I love it, and Norway as well. I like it that we're very international. Oh, and I can see the messages on the screen there too, so when they disappear. Okay, I'm getting a bit better organized about these things. Comments and questions are all welcome at any time, and I'll do my best not to interrupt the flow of my talking, and I'll get to your questions afterwards, because people have mentioned like it's better if I finish my sentences. And I agree. So that song was about the School of the Americas, otherwise known as the School of the Assassins, which was also had its name changed after a time because there was so much protest and it was getting a bad name as a school of torture, and so they changed the name to the Western Hemispheric Institute for Security Cooperation, WISC, which is a brilliant acronym, because then you can just whisk it under the rug, and forget about all of these things that are being taught there. But the fact is that the School of the Americas was and is teaching people how to torture and launch military coups against elected democracies, and how to maintain power through all sorts of underhanded and insidious ways, like lying and cheating, and how to delude the public into thinking that you're serving their interests. And it's basically how to do America around the Americas, and how to pull the wool over people's eyes and torture them, depending on who needs the wool and who needs the torture. There's Naomi Klein, in her book The Shock Doctrine, wrote the whole section of the book is related to the CIA's torture program, which was started up in the 1950s and was called MKUltra back then. And it's a fascinating little history, because in order to get around U.S. laws, the CIA, in order to perfect their torture techniques, which also involved hallucinogenic drugs, interestingly, they did not conduct these experiments in the United States. By and large, they conducted them in Canada. So, and then of course exported the whole thing to Latin America in a much more vicious, horrible way. Torture became a standard part. I mean, it's not like the CIA invented torture in the 50s, but torture became a very widespread standard part of the procedure in terms of how to control societies across Latin America, and this was not just Latin America, but particularly Latin America, and this was the part of the world that the U.S. was particularly focused on dominating at that period of time in the 80s, and also this was the part of the world that the School of the Americas was particularly focused on. And there in Fort Benning, Georgia, in Columbus, Georgia, Columbus is the city, Fort Benning is the military base within the city. There are, at any given time, at least there were, thousands of Latin American soldiers and officers and others from Latin America being trained in Spanish, how to perfect their practices involving torture and dominating societies and undermining democracies in order to maintain the oligarchies that controlled things in most Latin American countries at that time. Things have changed in different ways. In Latin America, many countries with more left governments have been abandoning the School of the Americas as a place to train their soldiers, which is a very positive development that for countries like Venezuela and Bolivia. But the other thing that's happened is the movement to shut down the SOA in the United States has become a lot less big. But that's true of a lot of movements in the United States, unfortunately. And it may be that part of the explanation for it becoming less of a prominent movement has also to do with the fact that fewer countries in Latin America are actually training their soldiers at the torture school in Georgia. But I don't know. The founder of the protest movement in the United States, a wonderful guy named Roy Bourgeois, from Louisiana, that's the French name. Roy was a minister, a priest who was defrocked for supporting women to be able to be priests. And this lost him a lot of support among various elements of the more strict Catholic Jesuit community, which had been much of the population involved with the protests against the SOA and going to the protests in Georgia. But I tend to think that that is only a small part of the lowering of the numbers at the protests. I think it may also have to do with just the general times that we're in. Bleaker sense of the possibilities here in the U.S., so that tends to lower the numbers at protests rather than increase them, as people might hope it would do. And I think that's probably a lot to do with it. And plus, Colombia is like, there's not as many countries, major countries, that are training their soldiers at the SOA anymore. But some of the more prominent occasions in the past, if you just think of prominent massacres that you've ever heard of in Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, they were most likely carried out by people who were in some their officers or some elements of the groups were trained. The groups doing the killing were trained at the SOA. For example, the assassin of Archbishop Oscar Romero in El Salvador in 1980, the assassination of the 6 priests and their maid and their maid's daughter in 80, when was that, 87, I think. There's a question on the screen. Yeah, I don't know. What passes for the left these days doesn't seem to care much for regime change and war. Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know what the left is. I'm very confused by the current political climate, and I've been thinking about trying to write something about it, but it's I don't know. It's not anything that has not been said already. But I think whatever, the I don't know. The left still exists, of course, but in its various different forms, and it's just a matter of which is more prominent. And of course, there's always these various elements of the left here in this country and any other. But I think what the person writing there is getting to is what is whatever passes as the left in terms of these so-called resistance protests against Trump, if that's what you're thinking of, which is the most prominent sort of things happening that would seem to indicate the presence of some kind of a left movement. That's what people would, looking at society, would say, oh, there's the left, that must be it, they're protesting Trump. So if that's the left, if that's what we're talking about as the left, then yeah, it's a very sorry state of affairs, because they don't seem to act much like a left in the sense that I would tend to understand the concept. Which traditionally has to do with supporting the working class, which is, I would say, if you bear with me on this rationale here, which I've been thinking of, I don't want to people can accuse folks of trying to reduce everything to class, like class is the most important thing or class is all that matters, and I'm not saying that, but I think class is the overwhelming thing that matters the most, and I can prove that to you, and I think in a very simple way, which is there's 93% of individuals in the United States do not make a six-figure income. They make less than that. So if you just think of like the people with the six-figure income as being, the ruling class and the people who serve the ruling class in some way. I mean, this is very broad. I mean, of course, there's very nice people who make that kind of money and are not doing evil things necessarily. But let's just say these are the people that tend to be the ones who can afford to own multiple houses. These are the ones who are the landlords. Even if they're just small landlords, these are the people, and then if some of others of them own thousands of properties and factories and lots of stocks and all this stuff. But if we just generally say that the working class is the 93% of the people who make less than $100,000 a year, broadly speaking, this class of people includes all those kinds of folks that the resistance appear to be so concerned about, and yet they never talk about it seems the basic class element here. I mean, how can you possibly welcome refugees in a city? How can you welcome DACA people who are dreamers? How can you welcome undocumented workers? How can you welcome trans people or LGBTQ or anybody else that you are supposedly concerned about? How can you welcome these people and say these people are welcome in your city, which is what the message of the resistance seems to be all about, if people can't afford to live in your city? The fact is Portland has lost 50% of its African American population between the last two censuses, and this is as a direct consequence of gentrification, nothing else. So no, you can't say African Americans are welcome in this city. They're clearly not welcome, because African Americans are overwhelmingly working class, and so they're leaving. So yeah, the left. What is this resistance? It's nonsense. It's nonsense. But anyway, yeah. So if I were to edit these broadcasts, I'd probably edit out that whole thing that I just said, because this is not to do with the actual broadcast that I'm doing, but in these live broadcasts, I like to just respond to questions or statements, whether or not they're directly related to the themes. But I waited until I was done with the SOA theme before I did that, before I answered that question. And I'll do the same thing with the next one. I'm not going to go zigzagging all over the place, but I'm going to look at this, whatever somebody just wrote here. Oh yeah, I totally agree. And I don't know. I guess for people watching this later, you can't see what these things are, so you don't know what I'm agreeing with. So I'm just going to say, read it out. What is happening in the U.S. with the resistance and the whole anti-Trump thing is a copy of what happened here in Italy during the Berlusconi years. Nothing good will come of it. Yes. I completely agree. Trump is just a carbon copy of Berlusconi, just another flamboyant, bigoted billionaire, just like Berlusconi, just with a bigger nuclear arsenal at his disposal, and an even more screwed up country. But yeah, and you can't, and yeah, and I think the point you're making there in Italy is so important, because and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that that the why nothing good will come of such a resistance is because when you have a resistance that is supposed to be resisting what people consider to be the extreme right, sort of neo-fascist types like Berlusconi and Trump, you end up with the lowest common denominator of anybody who opposes the extreme right, and this ends up being the same kinds of basically capitalist forces, the forces of real estate developers and all sorts of tech executives, the same kinds of forces that are causing the stratification of society in the first place and are causing the atomization of society, of people, are causing the division of wealth in society, which is exactly the same circumstances that have led to people like Trump and Berlusconi coming to power. So you elect the neoliberals, or you get behind the neoliberals like Macron and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, and you are just creating the stage for the next Trump or Berlusconi. You are doing nothing of use. You cannot get rid of people like Trump or Berlusconi by supporting neoliberal parties whose only claim to represent you is the fact that they are against bigotry. Being against bigotry doesn't make you a good person. That's a very, very low bar to set. Just because you are not a racist does not mean you're a good person. Or just because you claim not to be a racist. You, the proverbial you. Okay. Let's see. Now, where do we go? Where are we going next? Okay, we will now move on to... Oh, I have to look at this. Indeed, it's unstructural critique, and people with real concerns get caught in something horrible. I call it dissent consumerism. Yes, that's brilliant. Yes, I tend to agree with everything you say, by the way, but I sure do agree with that. Yes, dissent consumerism. I'm going to get my other guitar. We're in the 80s here, and there's a garbage truck outside. Close the window, and 5, folks. That's what you say when it takes longer than a few seconds to tune up. Mind if I send you a link on the topic in English that includes my thoughts on the decline of democracy now? Yes, I would love to see that. Thank you. I no longer get played on Democracy Now! It's been years now, ever since I said anything critical about their choices to play 83% in their music breaks, 83% of the music that they play is of people that had a #1 hit or won a Grammy, and I think that's not appropriate for an independent radio show, and the show would be much better if they played independent music in their breaks that was like songs about what they're doing stories about, you know, not just my songs, but other contemporary independent musicians. There's a lot of other ones. And ever since I wrote that blog post, I have not been played on Democracy Now! It's been about 3 years. And that's called vindictiveness. That's called somebody there being vindictive. I think I know who, but it doesn't matter. He grew up on a farm in a troubled Irish land, under foreign rule and the British Crown's command. His father fought for Ireland 50 years before, but the Free State cut their losses and the English won the war. When internment without trial was the order of the day, when his brother was arrested and his friends were blown away, when he was beaten near to death, he decided, come what may, he'd throw his lot in with the provost, and he joined the IRA. In the occupied 6 counties, perhaps it never will be known, all the foreign soldiers in Armagh and Tyrone, who decided to head back across the Irish Sea, so they wouldn't have to meet the man from south of Derry. He never wavered in his battle for Irish liberty, and the Crown would soon regret the day they named him enemy. The Brits called it bandit country, and it filled them all with fright. In the borderlands, he who walked the hills at night. Up the Provost, that's what he said. 3 little words that filled the British Crown with dread. With a rifle on his shoulder, a timer and a fuse, long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Once he was surrounded by the SAS. How he might escape was anybody's guess. In his boots and camouflage, he didn't miss a beat. He walked right past the soldiers and out into the street. Once he came upon a checkpoint, the soldier didn't want to die. He recognized our Francis, and the soldier waved him by. He didn't want to find out if he could take what he could give. He knew there'd be a shootout, and the soldier chose to live. Up the Provost, that's what he said. And from this farmer's son, better men had fled. With a rifle on his shoulder, a timer and a fuse. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. The North's most wanted man, with his photo everywhere, but he eluded capture with his wit and dyed blonde hair. For 6 years he was active, 3 times as long as most. He became a legend north to south and coast to coast. He came upon 2 soldiers out one night on patrol. They shot him in the firefight and the bullets took their toll. He crawled off into the bushes, but they found him the next day, put him on a stretcher and carried him away. Up the Provost, that's what he said. With a shattered bone and a body full of lead, with a rifle on his shoulder, a timer and a fuse. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. They beat him and they tortured him and they gave him 80 years. When they brought him to the H blocks, he was greeted there with cheers. He went right on to the blanket, and when the hunger strike began, he was the first to volunteer, along with Bobby Sands. days. He was an Irish soldier, that's how he did his time. He knew he was no criminal when occupation was the crime. Bobby Sands had passed beyond us, where Francis soon would be. And although he couldn't stand, and he could barely see. Up the provost, that's what he said, as they carried him to hospital to lay in his deathbed, with a rifle on his shoulder, a timer and a fuse. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Up the provost, that's what he said, and soon there'd be another standing in his stead, with a rifle on his shoulder, a timer and a fuse. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Long may we remember Commandante Francis Hughes. Let's see here. Just want to look and see if there's any... What happened to the broadcast? Oh, here we go. Okay. So, yeah, we're in the 1980s. And this, you know, as I've said this before, but each of the modules contains, maybe playing popular music increases their listener count. Wait, what's that related to? Oh, Democracy Now! Yeah, I would really doubt that that's the case, actually. Anyway, personal vendetta is stupid. I agree. Unfortunately, it's very common among certain folks. So that last song is related to a period in recent history, which is getting to, you know, we're in the sixth module of my musical history teaching aid, and we're just doing approximately 4 songs from each of the modules once a week, just to sort of get into a little bit of the what's out there on the history teaching aid. But each one actually on the website contains 10 or 15 or more songs and subjects for each of the 15 modules. I always say this in every broadcast, but so there you go. I've said it. So the 4 songs that I kind of chose for this week, that's the second one that you just heard, and it is related to one of the things that was happening in the world during the time of that concerns this module, which is what was popularly known as the Troubles in Ireland, in the north of Ireland primarily. And it began it began with the British occupation of Ireland hundreds of years earlier, but in its most in that particular exceptionally violent iteration in the late 20th century of the whole story of the British occupation of Ireland. It began with the indefinite detention of anybody that the British authorities in the north of Ireland wanted to detain in the early 70s. This was this was British rule of law, if you want to put it that way. At the time, it involved indefinite detention without trial of anybody that they wanted to detain. So it's very similar to Israel and their treatment of the Palestinians. which is still currently today, indefinite detention without trial is under military law, which is the law that most Palestinians live under in the occupied territories, West Bank and Gaza. Somebody pointed out, sounds like Guantanamo Bay. Yes, that is exactly the same under military law in the United States or outside of the United States, whatever, in Guantanamo Bay. If people are taken to Guantanamo Bay, they are also subject to exactly the same kind of thing, indefinite detention without trial. Although, in theory, if people are actually brought onto what they consider to be U.S. soil, then they are not subject to indefinite detention without trial. But so what? Because it doesn't matter. Because if the U.S. set up, places like Guantanamo Bay in order to avoid having to obey U.S. law, then essentially you can just, for shorthand, say that the U.S. also practices currently indefinite detention without trial. And as Paula just pointed out, this is also the reality for people in Australia, because Australia, while they, I don't know if they're doing indefinite detention without trial in Australian territory, Nauru and Manus Island and these other places are by all, for all effective purposes, Australian territory, even though they're officially not. And also secret prisons in Diego Garcia. Yes, absolutely. And what's not working? I don't know. Some people are having problems with the stream. I have no idea, but you got to ask YouTube about it. Yeah, they're still not obeying international law. That's right. And so at the time in the 70s, this was the law under British occupation. Was indefinite detention without trial, and this was for the years following the Bloody Sunday massacre, which was really. A lot of people might imagine when they think of the term massacre, they think of somebody or a number of people opening fire on a crowd and killing a lot of people, which itself is, of course, an extremely horrible thing. But the Bloody Sunday massacre was more a case of British forces going around in the city and seeking out particular individuals to assassinate, as well as opening fire on the crowds. So really, which is also not unusual in massacres, that there's some combination of opening fire on the crowd and particularly seeking out certain individuals who, people of interest. And these are the circumstances, along with poverty and obvious disparities between the Protestant and Catholic populations in many, many cases, that led, as well as, of course, British military vehicles being on the streets. And, these are the kinds of circumstances that led to the IRA's resistance movement against British occupation. The peak of the movement in terms of international awareness and recognition and empathy for the movement, I would say, was in 1981. And what was happening in 1981 in particular was IRA prisoners wanted to be recognized as prisoners of war rather than just common criminals, and this was a political point, so the people, which people thought maybe there was some chance this would work out. Others were sure it wouldn't work out, and were sure that the protest was a bad idea, including people within the leadership of the IRA. But the hunger strike was largely pushed forward by the people that were involved with this with this hunger strike, and Bobby Sands was the first to die, and he actually, while in prison, won a race for Parliament. And so this winning the race for Parliament was while the IRA had no intention of actually taking any seats in the Parliament, whether they won races or not. The fact that they won, the fact that he won the race for Parliament really flew in the face of all the media propaganda from lots of different sources, from Irish media, and the Irish Republic, from British media, U.S. media, that were painting the IRA as a terrorist group, as a unpopular little fringe group that had no connection to the population. And the fact that Bobby Sands won the race for Parliament really caused a lot of people around the world to question the way that the IRA was being portrayed, and the fact that there were these folks who ultimately numbered 10 who were so dedicated to the cause of Irish independence and Irish liberation that they were willing to go on hunger strike and not eat until they died in order to try to get Thatcher to recognize them as political prisoners, as prisoners of war, rather than as common criminals. But Thatcher famously wouldn't budge, even as her people were talking to the IRA through back channels. Her public persona was of the completely immovable force, and because of this, thousands and thousands of people died. And yeah, questions, comments are welcome, but otherwise I'm going to move on to other things. And we're in the 1980s. This is module 6 of my musical history teaching aid. 10,000 yuppies just moved here. 10,000 others came last year. The rent has doubled since I moved in. Each month I take it on the chin. Each month I wonder how many more can I stay in Portland before I move into my car or end up somewhere behind bars. 10,000 yuppies say don't complain now that the city is in the fast lane. It's just the market, and it knows best. That's how the bankers built the West. So just get rich, and you can stay. Otherwise, just go away. There's no room here for us. Holding on under the bus. I'm just a renter. This ain't my town. Might as well just burn it down for all I care. 10,000 yuppies think it's great to invest in Portland real estate. Keep Portland weird, they like to say, but that was over yesterday. Of their achievements, they're so proud, living lives in some cloud. But unlimited data will get you nowhere if you can't afford to care. I'm just a renter, this ain't my town. Might as well just burn it down for all I care. 10,000 yuppies, and on each block they're flipping houses and taking stock. Where's the next place that can transform tents and mansions the new norm? They like TED Talks, they like greed, they like wine like weed, they like bike lanes, they want more. They're the face of the new class war. I'm just a renter, this ain't my town. Might as well just burn it down. For all I care, for all I care, for all I care. That's a song I wrote a couple years ago, or maybe 1 year. I don't know. But anyway, it's about the situation now, but it's really also about this is a situation that began in the United States in the 1980s. In other countries that we're facing similar kinds of challenges with gentrification and rising costs of housing, and in many countries this started significantly later than the 80s. It depends on the country. Obviously, it's very different depending on where in the world you are. But in the United States, in the 1980s, this was when states all across the country, altogether there's 50 states, 48 of the 50 states in the course of the 80s and 90s passed statewide bans on rent control. And this was the timing for doing that at that time during the 1980s was absolutely brilliant on the part of the landlord class, because in the 1980s many people in the United States, for whatever combination of strange reasons, did not want to live in the cities. They wanted to live in the suburbs, where most people in the United States currently live. And people were moving out of the cities. Many people were moving out if they could afford to, and they were buying houses in the suburbs at a time when that was affordable for many people to do, which is now, of course, unaffordable for most people. But at that time, it was a big trend, and so the landlord class took the opportunity. Both Democrats and Republicans took the opportunity during that time to ban rent control. Their public reasoning for banning rent control was that it would allow landlords to make nicer buildings, and there'd be more construction going on because the landlords would be able to make more money from building new buildings, and so they'd have an incentive to do that. And the reasoning is strangely. The reasoning is completely true. And I don't oppose the reasoning. I oppose the implementation of this reasoning in the first place. Because yes, if you give landlords the opportunity to make more money by building more fancier buildings, they will do that. But that doesn't mean it's a good idea. We don't need more fancy buildings. We need more affordable buildings. And we need to make the ones that are already built affordable too. It's not just about building more. It's about building sensibly, and having sensibly designed cities that are affordable to live in. But passing all this legislation in the 80s was a brilliant move on the part of the landlord class, because there was so little opposition. Why was there so little opposition? Because people didn't want to live in the city. So many people didn't. So they didn't care. If you got rid of rent control because it was cheap to live in the cities in the first place. So it wasn't. It just wasn't a big issue. If they were trying, if rent control existed now, and if they were trying to ban it now, that would be, I think, a much bigger issue. But then again, if rent control still existed in 48 out of 50 states, then and if real effective forms of rent control existed in the two states where it does exist, which is California and New York, then we would be living in a whole different kind of country, which wouldn't have millions of people living in tents on the sidewalk all over every city in the country. So rent control. That's one of the things, the loss of these basic rights to housing. The U.S. and of course most other countries in the world signed these Geneva Conventions, one of which says that housing is a human right, and this is certainly not a human right that has any legal standing here in the U.S. And Ariel says if we had effective rent control still, then we wouldn't have this homeless situation. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And so, when people like the mayor of Portland currently, Ted Wheeler, when he says, "Oh, we're really trying hard to deal with the homeless crisis," we found housing for 4,000 people last year. Well, that's just basically almost useless because it's nice that you found housing for 4,000 people, but then because of the rapidly increasing cost of housing, rent, and also the cost of buying houses in Portland, but particularly because of the rising costs of rent, then you're going to have another 4, 6, 8,000 people next year homeless because they're one paycheck away from homelessness because they're spending most of their paychecks on their rent. So as soon as they don't have a paycheck, they can't pay the rent, and that's it. They're on the streets, They've already maxed out their credit cards. There's so many people in that situation already. I meet them all the time. So, governments should be housing people. That's good. But they should also be controlling the cost of housing in order to create an environment where it's affordable to live places. And then if you have that kind of situation, then a city like Portland actually proactively finding housing for 4,000 homeless people, that's impressive. Then you're talking about something impressive. But if you're just doing that and you're not controlling the rent, then you're not doing your job, Mr. Wheeler. And then if you go raiding homeless encampments because you think you're telling us that you're doing such a great job of housing the homeless that there's no need for new homeless encampments, then you're a class enemy of me and the working class generally, whether they know it or not. If I had an assistant, somebody could tell me what I'm doing next, but yeah. 93-year-old woman arrested for not paying rent. Oh, wow. December 15th, 2017, CBS in Miami. I think that's debtor's prison, isn't it? Okay. Moving on. Now we're in the early 90s. And there's other things that happen, of course. And some of them are in the module at davidrovics.com/history. Musical teaching aid number 6. And this is another song. And I'll talk about it after I sing it. Kirsten in Denmark, this is her favorite song of mine, and I never do it for her, but I just worked it up this morning, so next time I see you, Kirsten, I'll sing it, which will be May 2nd in Silkeborg. I saw her picking yellow flowers, smiling at the sunlight, weaving stems to make a necklace, working hard to get it all right. she reached out to trade it for the bread her mama brought her. When I looked into her eyes, I saw my daughter. Her feet were bare as mine were. When I grew up in the country, and just like her, I watched my mother hanging out the laundry. Now she's grabbed some clothes and darted off, and her mama chased and caught her. When I looked into her eyes, I saw my daughter. Now she's running down the alleyway, dust rising up behind her. She hides beneath the rubble where nobody can find her. And when she tires and walks back home, her mama tells her that she loves her. When I looked into her eyes, I saw my daughter. When the sun sets, she is hungry, but there's no more bread to give her. The cement floor is cold tonight, and beneath the rags she shivers as the jet planes scorch the sky. She's longing for her brother. As the bombs fall in the distance, she wonders, will the next one fall much closer? It's not so far to Basra, and I could be her father. When I looked into her eyes, I saw my daughter. When I looked into her eyes, I saw my daughter. I think one of the things that illustrates the pathetically same nature of our two ruling parties in the United States is demonstrated in this episode of Recent History, as it is demonstrated in so many other episodes of Recent History. But in the case of the 1991 invasion of Iraq under George H.W. Bush and the sanctions that followed the invasion, H.W. Bush lost the next election in '92, I think largely because he was so unpopular because he invaded Iraq and Panama and other countries. I think that had a lot to do with his unpopularity and a lot to do with the fact that Bill Clinton won the '92 election. But throughout Bill Clinton's 8-year presidency, during which time he imprisoned more African Americans than I think any other administration in history, and oversaw the further impoverishment of much of the United States, as well as maintaining, passing lots of free trade laws, NAFTA, GATT, WTO, all happened under Clinton, further impoverishing the working class in many countries, both in the United States as well as in Mexico, causing lots and lots of problems, as well as in Canada and elsewhere. But Bill Clinton also maintained sanctions on Iraq, which were instituted under H.W. Bush and were approved by the United Nations, which is why in the insurgency during the during the next invasion of Iraq. One of the early targets of the insurgents was the United Nations headquarters in Baghdad, and this was specifically because the UN, as led by the United States, was responsible for the deaths of, according to UNICEF, 500,000 Iraqi children who would not have otherwise died during that period of time, during the period of the sanctions under Bill Clinton. And this was it was well before the end of Bill Clinton's terms in office. The sanctions continued, of course, under George W. Bush, and then another invasion happened in W's first term, and the occupation continued. But during Bill Clinton's 8 years, those sanctions killed 500,000 children, to say nothing of all the adults that died. And this is according to the UN, and the UN supported the sanctions. So, there's lots of, different elements within the UN who obviously have different interests and different, some are good, others are evil. But Bill Clinton's Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, when she was on, I believe it was CBS, some mainstream big TV, primetime news program, 60 Minutes, I think. And she was asked if she was given the statistic that UNICEF said 500,000 Iraqi children had died during the course of the sanctions on Iraq because they were so punishing. And she was asked whether the price was worth it, and she said yes. So that's Bill Clinton. That's the Democratic Party, and that's what happened in Iraq in the 1990s. And all those children are your children. Thank you for tuning in. I'll stick around for another minute in case anybody has comments or questions. Let's see. Yeah, and Ariel points out that there are children in North Korea dying now because of U.S. sanctions, and that is absolutely correct. Next week, Monday morning, I will do another of these episodes, number 7 in the series, and for those of you in California or Texas, I will be in both of those states in late March. Word is that I be singing at a conference in Tehran, in Iran, at the beginning of March. I don't know. Apparently I am. I'll believe that when I see the plane tickets, but apparently I'm booked at this conference. And if you're in Europe, I will be there from the middle of April until the middle of June, and I am very much actively booking gigs. Right now I have gigs confirmed in Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Germany, Belgium, England, Wales, and Ireland. And I would love to do more gigs in all of those places, as well as other nearby countries. So I'd love to hear from you if you might be interested in organizing something, if you might be inclined to join my CSA, my Community Supported Art Scheme. I would very much appreciate that. You can find out more about that at davidrovics.com/subscribe, which is my main method for surviving in the post-merch, everything is free on YouTube era. And I also just got an account to take cryptocurrency. So if you go to davidrovics.com, you can see right there front and center my address for taking Bitcoin, and I can provide you with addresses for other things in case anybody out there has some cryptocurrency that they really want to donate to me. Post-merch, why not sell merch? It's more a question of why not, who's going to buy it. I sell it. I mean, davidrovics.com/merch. You can buy my merch there, but the last time anybody ordered anything from my merch page was months ago. 20 years ago, I used to sell a lot more, hell of a lot more. I was constantly going to the post office and sending CDs to people. That's a thing of the past. People listen to Spotify. Michael, in case you haven't discovered Spotify, you just go to Spotify and we're all there. All the music you ever wanted to hear, it's all there. And that's where everybody is. That's where they're all listening to music online because it's free and it's high quality. Why should they buy CDs? I don't. It's nothing to feel bad about. It's the way things are. It's good. It's just that we artists now have to find another way to survive because we don't sell merch anymore. And so donations, people don't do one-off donations that much. People just don't remember, And of course, other people are broke, and then it's for them. It's especially great that all the music is free online because it should be free. It should be available. You shouldn't have to pay if you can't afford it. But if you can afford it, it's great if you can join my CSA, which involves sending me $5 a month or $50 a year, and you get all the free music that would be free anyway. So, good deal for me. Whether it's a good deal for you, it's a matter of question, depending on your definition of these things. But I wouldn't be able to keep doing this without the people who are supporting me in that way. So, if you're one of the people who can afford to do that, then that is much appreciated. And let's see. Oh, thank you, Papa. Howard Rovics says, so very informative, looking forward to next week. Yay. And I will be back next week. And what's that last comment? It's a great deal. Paula says it's a great deal. Well, I think it's a great deal. Subscribers do even get some exclusive digital perks, but mostly they get the same free stuff that everybody else gets. Okay, thank you very much for listening, everybody. And I've enjoyed monologuing to you, and I will hopefully see you all next week, and feel free to share this online with people. It'll be archived as soon as I stop talking. It will be archived or a few minutes after that by YouTube, and you can then share it with anybody. And this is encouraged by me because I want to be famous. Okay. Have a good week. See you in a week. Ginkgo tea to break that cold. I think I'm done with the cold, but the funny thing is that talking actually wears your voice out much more than singing. And that's why my throat is like this. I've been talking for more than an hour. And But yeah, I should try Ginkgo. Sounds good. I like the name anyway. Ginkgo. See you. Bye-bye.